Chapter 2. Samuel Morgan. The storm from the night prior persisted into the early hours of the morning when Samuel Morgan got the call. Another victim of the ghost stalker, found dead in his apartment on Cable Crescent. He was barely awake, shaking off the grogginess as he assured his partner over the phone that he would be there soon. He slowly shuffled his way out of bed, making an effort not to wake his wife, who was still fast asleep. Samuel made his way to the washroom, inspecting himself in the mirror to see if he was presentable enough to go to the crime scene as he was. The many sleepless nights were not kind to him. His already wrinkled face now had the addition of dark bags that hung low beneath his eyes. His mustache was unkempt, with new gray hairs flecked in alongside the brown. The same could be seen from his hair, with what was left of it shifting to a similar shade from age and stress. Good enough, he mumbled to himself, making no attempt to tidy his appearance before getting ready. He simply slipped into his uniform from the day prior, grabbed whatever quick breakfast meal was left in the fridge for him, and stepped out the door before his wife could wake. The storm had somehow gotten worse than it was during the night. The sky was stained a deep shade of gray, bringing down cascades of dark water which flooded the streets like a river. Driving to the crime scene was a nightmare in that weather. Samuel had to take several detours due to his usual route being blocked off from flooding, turning a 10-minute drive into 20. By the time he finally got there, paramedics were seen carrying the body out of the dilapidated apartment complex on a large stretcher. Samuel could see his partner, Norman Keller, waiting outside for him. The kid looked shaken up, as if this were his first crime scene all over again. He nervously paced back and forth in the pouring rain, letting it soak his uniform and drench his black hair that he kept slicked back to keep it out of his eyes. Lighting a cigarette, Samuel stepped out of his car to do the same song and dance he was used to by now. The moment Norman saw him approaching, he immediately broke free from the dissociated trance he was in, calling out to Samuel before he had even gotten across the street. "What the hell took you so long?" he yelled, his arms folding onto his chest. Samuel completely ignored this remark as he made his way towards his partner. Up close, he could now see that Norman was visibly shaking, but he couldn't tell if that was from the cold or whatever happened before he'd arrived. Norman went to provide the details of the murder, but got distracted the moment he got a good, proper look at Samuel. He pulled him aside, keeping his hand on his shoulder as he whispered to him. "Sam, I thought you told your wife you'd quit." Norman pointed at the cigarette in Samuel's mouth. The older cop rolled his eyes at the comment, pulling the cigarette out of his mouth and stamping it on the ground. "Norman, does that really matter right now?" Samuel said, as he turned back towards the apartment, staring up at the sorry state it was in. The complex, just like every other building on Cable Crescent, looked like it should have been abandoned years ago. The building was one giant, soulless block of concrete, with windows shoddily implemented into the sides of it to give the illusion of a proper living space. "Just give me the details. Same as the others?" His gaze never broke from the building as he spoke. Norman shook his head and lightly face-palmed, embarrassed that he even let himself get distracted from what was at hand. Oh, right. Yeah, same as all the others. Caucasian, male, brunette, early 20s. Was found at around 5 in the morning by his sister, who came by to check on him. Poor girl found him in his bed with his throat slashed." Norman let out a long, exasperated sigh as he finished explaining. "And what about family? Were you able to get in contact with anyone else?" Samuel asked, continuing the conversation as if he'd had it hundreds of times before. "Only family we're currently aware of is a sister. No parents we can contact, and we're looking into any friends who may have known him," Norman said as he now walked in front of Samuel, trying to grab his attention. "It's definitely our guy. Matches his whole MO to a T." "Witnesses?" Samuel responded, folding his arms as he slowly met his partner's gaze. "Nope. Nothing new that can help us find our guy. Just another victim to add to the list. As Norman replied, Samuel went to speak, but was interrupted as his partner suddenly piped up again, oddly excitedly. But that doesn't mean we aren't getting closer. Samuel looked at Norman confused, raising one of his bushy eyebrows as he spoke. Yeah, Norman. That is exactly what that means, he said sarcastically. Norman immediately continued, not letting Samuel's snide remark stop him. No, you don't get what I mean. See, last night after you went home, I started doing a bit of detective work myself. And after a couple hours of digging into some old reports and talking to some people, I think we might be able to figure out who our guy is. Samuel was surprised by the sudden conviction of his usually immature partner, but also took what he was saying with a grain of salt. Norman was, by all intents and purposes, still a rookie. He made reckless decisions that Samuel usually had to clean up after, so hearing this didn't inspire the awe that Norman had hoped. He tilted his head, waiting for Norman to continue. Now, I can tell from your expression that you're skeptical. But trust me, I got something good here. Last night after you left, I got a call from someone claiming they had a run-in with our guy. As Norman explained his process, he began to pace around in the rain like before. I talked to him about it, and the account they gave me sounded really oddly familiar, like I'd heard the story before. Please get on with it, Samuel grumbled as he rubbed his hand against his head. I was going to. You can't rush me here, Norman responded, raising his voice slightly and moving his hands in an exaggerated fashion. It took him a moment to regain his train of thought before he could continue. Anyways, I realized after talking to the guy why it sounded so familiar. A couple of guys a few months back reported some really similar encounters, and what do you know, when I decided to do a background check, all of these guys had the same description as our killer's victims. Caucasian, male, brunette, early 20s. As he finished explaining, he stopped in his tracks completely, holding his arms in grandiose fashion, waiting for his partner's approval. Samuel did see the merit in Norman's research, but also couldn't help but find himself questioning it. Interesting, he said quietly, putting his hand to his chin, lost in thought. And what makes you think this wasn't a coincidence? Do you have any way of proving these people's stories line up with our killer? Nope, Norman said with an odd amount of confidence. And that, my friend, is why I asked them all to come to the station today. You what? Samuel asked, now more confused than ever. Why would you ask these people to come to the station with no proof they're even involved in this? You're just working on a hunch. As he spoke, Samuel sounded more and more exhausted with Norman's reckless actions, now rubbing his hand against his head as if to fight off a headache. Sam, buddy, look, here's how I see it. Right now, a hunch is the best thing we have to work with. We got a maniac on the loose, and not a single lead as to who he could be. I figured that we could give this a shot. Let these people tell their stories, see if what they describe lines up with our guy. And if so, that might give us the info we need, Norman explained, waving his hands in all different directions as he spoke. There was a long pause as Samuel considered what his partner was saying. He ultimately let out a long sigh as he agreed to play along. Fine. We'll go to the station and see what they can tell us. Norman, this better not be a waste of our time. It won't be, trust me. I got a good feeling about this. Norman cut off Samuel, already heading back to his car. As he swung the door open, he waved to Samuel, shouting to him from a distance, I'll see you back at the station. Don't be late this time. And with that, he drove off, splashing water from the street everywhere. Samuel soon followed his partner to the Carpenter's Landing police department, pulling over on the side of the road and stepping out of his car. As he made his way inside, he was greeted by Norman, who took him to where the three men were waiting to give their testimonies. Before they entered the room, Samuel voiced some concerns with his partner. "They haven't spoken with each other, have they? The men you called? I don't want their stories getting mixed up with each other." He spoke sternly, making sure Norman understood what he was talking about. "No, they haven't. Each of them only arrived a little bit ago, and they're just waiting at the front desk to give their testimonies. None of their stories are going to be jumbled up with each other. It'll be fine," Norman reassured his partner, gesturing with his hands for him to calm down. "Now, if you want to wait in there," he pointed towards a small room they stood in front of, the window revealing an empty white room with a table in the middle. "I can go get our first guy." Samuel didn't say anything else. He simply opened the door and stepped foot into the interview room to await the first of the three witnesses. A few minutes passed by in silence, with Samuel reconsidering even bothering with this when he could be investigating any other leads regarding their killer. Before he could decide to just get up and leave, though, Norman arrived with the first of their witnesses. The man who walked in with him was a tall, larger fellow with brown stubble and a large black hoodie. His head was clean-shaven, and he had a friendly look to him. He and Samuel shook hands before he took a seat at the table across from the officers. "Sam, this here is Bruce MacDonald," Norman introduced the man now sitting with them, who gave a small, awkward wave in response. "I'm told, Bruce, that you had a run-in with somebody who may be the guy we are currently looking for. What can you tell us about that night? We want all the details you can provide." Samuel made sure to speak in a softer tone than his usual speaking voice, to try and make Bruce as comfortable as possible. "Well, I guess I better start with what my buddies and I were doing before anything happened," Bruce said, trailing off as he began to explain his account of what happened the night he came face to face with death.